Beat of MK, this is MKFM, so we're live here at the Civic offices here in Milton Keynes for our final election debate for Milton Keynes South. So tonight we're joined by all the political parties, apart from the Liberal Democrats. Lisa Smith couldn't make it this evening, so we've got someone here from Conservatives, Labour, UKIP, the Green Party and the Independents as well. So this is a live broadcast. If you've got any questions, you can tweet us at MKFM and ask your questions. Tonight's broadcast is in association with the MK News. Okay, so what we're going to do first of all is just to get everyone on the panel to just give a brief introduction, just to basically say their name, what party they're representing, and where they live in Milton Keynes. So we'll start with Iain Stewart.
Iain Stewart, I'm standing for re-election as the Conservative candidate, and I live in Tattenhall.
Thank you, Iain.
Yeah, I'm Stephen Fulton, I'm the Independent, and I'm living in Shenley Church End.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Vince Peddle. I'm the UKIP parliamentary candidate for Milton Keynes South, and I live in Tattenhall.
Hello.
Samantha Pancheri, I'm standing for the Green Party in Milton Keynes South. I live in West Bletchley.
Okay, welcome.
Hello, I'm Andrew Pakes. I'm the Labour and Cooperative parliamentary candidate for Milton Keynes South, and I live in Newport Pagnell.
So they're all the candidates that are on the panel tonight. So without wasting any more time, we're going to give each party now 2 minutes to basically tell them why you should vote for them. So we're going to start with Andrew Pakes this evening. 2 minutes starts now.
Hello there, my name's Andrew Pakes. As I said, I'm trying to do two things in this election. One I feel very sad about, and that's to defeat Iain at the other end of the panel and become your next MP for Milton Keynes South. Secondly, I also want to be the first Member of Parliament for Milton Keynes to have actually been born and grown up and gone to school in the city. Milton Keynes has just turned 48. As we approach our 50th anniversary, I think some of the big challenges that the founding principles of Milton Keynes were set up to address are coming back to haunt us again. And the reflections, I always say, are the things that affected me and the things I hear on the doorstep. I was always brought up to believe that the growth of Milton Keynes was a great thing if we had the infrastructure and support to go alongside it. And my big contention is, I'm worried that as the economy begins to get back on track, as we begin to build more houses, as we begin to expand further, we're not getting that infrastructure to support the size of the city that we are. And that worries me. It worries me deeply because it affects not just existing residents, it affects the ability of this city to attract jobs, to get the best quality of life, and to help people make choices for themselves and their families. So what do I mean by infrastructure not keeping up with expansion? I think it's the everyday things, and I think it's the big things. I think it's the fact we have a hospital that is simply too small for the population we've got. I think it's about people phoning up or going to their GPs to get appointments and finding out they are waiting longer and longer to get in there. I think it's about the fact that despite we are building houses in this city, the proportion of affordable houses being built is going down rather than going up, which is making it more difficult for youngsters and other people to get on the ladder. I think it's about childcare. The cost of childcare has gone up by 30% on average since 2010. These are the things that matter. Getting decent jobs, getting infrastructure right, and actually making sure we have a better plan for Milton Keynes in the years ahead.
Thank you, Andrew. That was Andrew Pakes from the Labour Party. Let's go to Samantha from the Greens.
Hi, I moved to Milton Keynes about 5 years ago with my husband and our children. My husband actually grew up here, but I'm quite new to the town. And one of the first things that struck me about Milton Keynes was the amazing scope of potential that we have here for being a pioneer and setting an example to the rest of the country. That's something that I think was a founding principle of this town. But somewhere along the way, I think we've lost sight of that, and we've started to become a very, very slick, very corporate place. This focus on big branding and chain retail. I don't know if you know this, but we actually have 5 Nando's in Milton Keynes with a population of 250,000 people, which is actually, in Nando's terms, only just behind Birmingham and their population of over 1 million people. Exactly. You know, we're the 6th most unaffordable place to live in Britain because our rents are skyrocketing, homelessness has gone through the roof, but new housing developments that are being built cater for wealthy investors and buy-to-let landlords. So if I'm elected as MP for Milton Keynes South, I want to work with people here, I want to work with businesses here, I want to get us back on track. I want us to be pioneers in sustainable, affordable housing, in reliable public transport, in community-owned renewable energy, and a healthcare system that's owned by the people, accountable to the people, and serves the needs of the people. And that's all perfectly achievable, contrary to whatever corporate-sponsored politicians and right-wing press will tell you. When we invest in the community, we create a stronger society. When we stop allowing big businesses and wealthy individuals to profit from privatising our public services, we create a sustainable economy. And that's the heart and soul of Green Party policy, and I'm so proud to be part of that.
The Beat of MK, this is MKFM live from the Civic offices in Milton Keynes. Tonight we've got the parliamentary candidates for Milton Keynes South. We've just heard from Samantha from the Green Party. Let's hear from Vince from UKIP.
Good evening. Yes, thanks, Darren. Okay, I've lived in Milton Keynes for 38, almost 39 years. I've had, to be honest, a wonderful life here. I feel it's a great city to live in, and we need to make sure that it continues to be a great city into the future. I've raised 4 children in the city. They've all remained local. I'm a design engineer by trade. Had 35 years in that trade. This is not a career move for me. I'm an ordinary working man who feels he's got to do something to change the political system in this country. I'm trying to play a part in that. People are disengaged with the political system at the moment. The established parties have lost the interest of the people, and UKIP as a party, including myself, are trying to bring it back. So we have a manifesto that's been approved, audited by independent bodies, unlike the other parties. If we left the EU, for example, reduced the foreign aid budget, scrapped HS2 project until we can actually afford it, and ended health tourism, those few things could save us in excess of 25 billion a year. And with that money, we feel we should be investing that in our people, in the people that need it. For example, the homeless, people on 0-hour contracts need to be given proper jobs and better wages. We need to deal with the levels of mass immigration so that we stop compressing our wages and allow British people to earn a better wage. We need to take people on the minimum wage out of taxation altogether, scrap inheritance tax and the bedroom tax, and reduce energy bills, remove subsidies, for example, for wind farms to reduce your energy bills.
That's Vince from UKIP. Let's move over to Steve from the Independents.
Yeah, thanks. So this has been the case all the way during this election, that the other people on the panel here tend to articulate exactly the problem we have in Milton Keynes, and it is infrastructure, it is jobs, it is training. But we've known this for a number of years. We've known that this town has needed investment for a number of years. We've had a Conservative government, we've had Conservative MPs in this town, and I'm really disappointed that with that calibre of people, we haven't achieved things like the city deal to get the investment that we need. We have too many people on job seekers allowance. And so I asked my question, well, why is this? And again, I think this is a symptom of a broken political system. We stopped voting for people that are going to make the change for us, and we get people in that are more aligned and loyal to a party than the citizen that votes for them. And this is why I'm standing. It's to stand as the person that's going to represent Milton Keynes and fight their case and not be whipped into shape up at Westminster. I want to keep companies and headquarters here, so I think there's no shame in wanting to attract big headquarters. It stimulates small businesses, that stimulates the need for jobs, but then as Milton Keynes we have to satisfy those jobs with people that live here. Then we don't have to worry ourselves and get paranoid about people coming and taking the jobs, because we would have made the jobs here for our young. We would have given them the skills. So that's why I'm running as an independent, is so that I can be your independent voice and not beholden to any main party.
That's Steve from the Independent Party. Finally, let's go over to Iain Stewart from the Conservatives.
Thank you. I'm asking for your votes on the 7th of May, primarily to give us a chance to finish the job that we've started. 5 years ago, when the coalition came to power, the country was in dire straits, and our economy was unhealthy, our public finances were in a mess, and we've had to take some very tough decisions to start getting the country back on track. And we are part of the way through that job. We have one of the best economic performances in the Western world now. We're getting the deficit down and we're on track to go back into surplus. And the future is looking strong on the path that we're on. So my main pledges in this election are, firstly and foremostly, stick to that economic plan. It is incentivising businesses to create the jobs, to create the revenues that will help get people back to work, but importantly generate the funds that we want to invest in our public services. Without that economic growth, there won't be the money to invest. Secondly, it is about investing and keeping investing in our infrastructure, both the hard physical infrastructure, like improving rail services and the roads locally, and I've been involved significantly in the transport side of things, arguing for projects like East-West Rail, for the dualling of the A421 and other infrastructure projects. That needs to continue. And it is about making sure that the health service and school places keep up with the demands of a growing population. But the third area I really want to focus on if I'm re-elected is looking at the long-term vision for Milton Keynes. We do turn 50 in 18 months' time. We have reached the original plan size for Milton Keynes, but we don't have that vision for the next 50 years. Do we continue to grow? Do we form part of a regional hub, or lots of other different options? I came to Milton Keynes after graduating from university. I love it here, and I want to be part of its next 50 years.
Stewart from the Conservative Party. Okay, let's tackle some individual topics now. Let's talk about money in people's pockets. Obviously, Milton Keynes has been accredited time and time again to be one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Also, unemployment very low, around 1.5%. Some major investment in the city as well. But on the other side, we've got people on 0 hours contracts. We're also one of the biggest areas for children living below the poverty line. So what we want to do now is give each candidate 90 seconds basically to say what they're going to do about this particular topic if they're elected. So we will start first of all with Vince from UKIP. We've got 90 seconds.
Yes, you're right. The employment situation in Milton Keynes is very good at the moment, but is that based on 0 hour contracts? How many of those employed are on working tax credit? We feel that, first of all, people on the minimum wage shouldn't pay income tax, so we would raise the threshold to 13,000 to take them out of the tax bracket altogether. Income tax on middle earners, we feel that the threshold should be raised to the 40% rate so that middle earners can have a bit of a tax break as well. In terms of benefits, we think that newly arriving immigrants should not be entitled to either use the NHS for free or claim benefits immediately they arrive in the country. This will put money back into the benefits pot, and we would all benefit, all the people on benefits will be able to benefit from that, excuse the pun. I've mentioned before the bedroom tax. It never worked. It was the wrong way of trying to achieve its end goal. We need to supply more housing to make housing mobility in a better place.
Thank you, Vince. Let's go over then to Steve from the Independents.
Yeah, so I think you touched upon things like immigration and welfare tourism. Yeah, I think we all agree. None of us want to see this happening. I think as a country we should have the same level of strength and balls that Angela Merkel has, and in light of her achieving European Court judgment to prevent to have no obligation to pay social benefits during the period that migrants come in, and the fact that actually within the European law, if someone arrives in a country and they don't have sufficient funds to feed their dependencies, they have no right to take benefits. I think there's a lot that's already in place in law, and there's some judgments that are coming forward that we should take advantage of. I want European companies to build their headquarters here, so I don't want us being paranoid about the EU. I want us to understand it and absolutely use it correctly in the same way as our neighbours in Germany and France do.
Okay, the beginning of MK, this is MKFM. We're coming live from the civic offices here in Milton Keynes. It's a parliamentary broadcast for Milton Keynes South. Got all the candidates around the table tonight. We're talking about housing at the moment. We've just heard from Steve from the Independents. Let's move to Iain Stewart from the Conservatives.
Well, look, as I said in my introductory remarks, the most important thing is keeping the economy strong so that companies can continue to expand and take on people. That is first and foremost the way to improve the economic well-being of an area. This government has raised significantly the personal tax threshold from under £7,000 when we came to office to over £10,000. And our manifesto is committing us to raise that further to £12,500 and legislate that people earning the minimum wage and working an average number of hours would always be free from income tax. So that is at the heart of our manifesto. But we're also looking at other things like increasing the number of free childcare hours available each week so that people aren't disincentivised from taking a work because they would have to pay more in childcare. I think that's part of the mix as well. Obviously, with a strong economy, stable economy, you keep interest rates and mortgage rates low. So that people aren't faced with ever-increasing housing costs. So there's a whole package of measures that we're looking at. We're not out the woods yet. The world economy is still very unstable. So it is absolutely vital that we keep the economy growing and keep those jobs being created.
Thank you, Iain. Let's move over to Samantha from the Greens.
I think the issue of money in people's pockets, you can divide roughly into two pieces. One is about how much money people bring home and one is about how much it costs them to live. One of the things that we would do is to make the minimum wage a living wage and end this scandal of in-work poverty. At the moment, we have a government-sanctioned minimum wage that we know people cannot live on. This is the government saying it's okay for your employer to pay you less than you need to make ends meet, meaning that we have an ever-increasing number of people who have no choice but to turn for the state to top up their very low incomes. And in fact, 30%, I believe that's correct, Andrew, 30% of jobs in Milton Keynes pay a low wage. That is below £17,000 a year. So we would make the minimum wage a living wage. We'd look for families to raise child benefit to £40 a week, actually helping families get their children out of poverty. 1 in 4 children in Milton Keynes lives below the poverty line. That's something that we need to change because the knock-on impact of that is huge. I don't want to buy into this idea that migrants are a drain on our welfare state because we know they put in 64% more to our economy than they take out in benefits, and we know that migrants are 45% less likely to claim than native British people. So that's the approach that we would take to putting more money in pockets, but also reducing what it costs to live by capping rents, by protecting the cost that people have to pay out just to make ends meet.
That's Samantha from the Green Party. And finally, on this particular topic, money in people's pockets, let's go to Andrew Pakes from Labour.
Thanks, Darren. I wanted to have the full story about what's happening with this economy. It's great that the economy, after the crash, is beginning to turn a corner. It is really important that we begin to see unemployment coming down, the economy begin to be stable. But, and there's a big but here, what the government never tells you is the second half of the story. The economy is beginning to turn, but the proceeds of growth are not being shared widely enough. It is okay for those at the top and those who caused the crash to benefit, but for those of us, the rest of us out there, we've got to make sure we have an economy which is sharing those. So as Sam said, unemployment's low in this city, but 30% of the jobs in Milton Keynes are now officially classified as low paid. In some estates, 4 out of 10 children are growing up in poverty. I don't doubt the government has a long-term economic plan. I just disagree with them that it's the right plan for Milton Keynes. A plan that says 1 million people need food banks is the wrong plan for this country. And we've got to turn it around. So whether it's on childcare and increasing the free element to support families making that choice, I think it's really important. Whether it's tackling 0 hours. Too many of our jobs in this borough are now low paid, minimum wage, 0 hours with no guarantees of the income families can come in. It is the role of government to set the rules of the game for the economy, and we should be saying clearly things like 0 hours are wrong and outlawing them and getting the economy back again. I'm a big fan of the living wage. We've said as a government, if we get in, we will give tax breaks to companies to enable them, as long as they can demonstrate the money goes to staff, to start lifting the minimum wage up to the living wage. If people have money in their pockets, they can afford their bills, but also get the economy turning locally.
That's Andrew from Labour talking about the money in people's pockets. We've got a live studio audience with us tonight. Is there anyone in the audience so far that's got a question for any of the candidates? Okay, let's go over to this gentleman here. Hello, sir, what's your name, where are you from, and if you could ask your question, please.
My name's John Feely. I live here in Milton Keynes, Bolbeck Park. This is a medical question. It's a known fact that cannabis can cure cancer, but nobody is promoting it. It's on the internet, it's never mentioned in the media. What do you propose to do about it?
Okay, would everyone like to answer this question, or just... okay, over to Iain. Thank you, Iain.
Well, I'm not a medical expert at all. We have an organisation called NICE who decides what drugs can or can't be regulated. There'll be different opinions on the properties of different substances. Up till now, they have said, no, it shouldn't be prescribed for medical use. If the evidence changes, I'll look at it, but until the experts tell me that, I think we stick with them.
Did you want to come back on that point?
Yeah, well, I haven't got cancer, but I do have an illness, and I have used cannabis oil, and it's improved my health by over 50%. I was prescribed a drug through NICE at Papworth Hospital called Pafenidone, which costs the National Health, or you, everybody here, £30,000 a year. I ditched that medication a year ago because I heard about cannabis oil, which I acquired. And my lung capacity, because it's a lung disease I've got, IPF, has improved by over 50%. To me, that is proof enough. And what I hear from you is the same old wishy-washy stories that we get from cancer research, that there's not enough evidence. Cannabis has been used as a medicine for 10,000 years.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to come back? Steve from the Greens, from the Independents, sorry.
Yeah.
Greens, if you like, Steve, that's right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, Steve, Independents, of course, just to clarify that.
I find it really, very interesting. I didn't know that was a fact. But maybe I've experienced the fact that the media can make things invisible. As an independent, apart from tonight and other couple of occasions, I'm invisible. So I think I would take what you say seriously and want to investigate it, but it brings a bigger issue to me, and that's not with this fine radio station here, but I've got a big problem with the way that the media control the information that we have. So I'm up for stopping issues being invisible.
Okay, thank you. And is anyone else on our panel like to come back? Samantha, then from the Greens.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really pleased that you asked this question because it's an enormous issue. We have a very upside-down approach to drug use in general in this country. We've taken a crime-based approach rather than looking at a medical-based approach. And exactly the medical use of cannabis and cannabis oil is actually very widely documented. But as Stephen's highlighted, it's something that's virtually invisible in the media, and that's where a lot of people tend to get their information from, and that tends to inform how they then go on and vote when it comes to elections. I share your feelings about the use of cannabis as an alternative to drugs. I have a condition myself, a chronic pain condition called fibromyalgia, and people have told me about the different alternatives because the medication I take no doubt costs the NHS and the taxpayers a lot of money. Personally, it's something that I feel does need to be given much more serious consideration and legitimacy, and I'm very proud that in the Green Party manifesto we do say that we would have a complete overhaul of drugs regulation and taking a medical-based approach rather than treating it as a crime issue.
Okay, and finally, just give Vince and Andrew the opportunity to come back on this point.
Yeah, I'll go first. I totally agree with Steve's point on the media. We are fed some nonsense sometimes. I mean, UKIP are suffering big time from misinformation from the media. On the point of view of of cannabis for treatment, yes, if it's proven to be beneficial, then we should pursue it. There's no issue there. The way the country's run, however, being cynical for a moment, is if a large drug corporation was to decide that it was profitable, then I'm sure that the country will move with it and take it on.
And finally, Andrew from Labour.
Yeah, look, I think these issues are more finely balanced than sometimes they are, and actually, a lot in this election, we'd like to talk as candidates and say where we disagree. Actually, I agree with Iain on this question. I think, as we come together as a nation, we have to have a body of experts and others who will adjudicate on some of these new treatments and how evidence changes. I think all of these things constantly have to be kept under review. I'm not a medical expert. There are a bunch of people who are, and as treatments come up and evidence changes, someone has to make that judgment for us. At the moment, I take their guidance, which the case hasn't been proven, to legalise it or use it in medical conditions.
Okay, so let's, Iain, did you want to come back just on this because you put your hand up first of all and answer the question? Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I just reiterate my initial point. I know, for example, that NICE has looked at the use of cannabis for easing arthritis and has concluded that it's not appropriate to legislate. But as Andrew says, you keep these things under review.
Okay.
And I've got, as a politician, I've got to be guided by the expert advice in this.
Okay, Iain, thanks for that. The Beat of MK, this is MKFM live from the civic offices here in Milton Keynes. It's a candidate debate for Milton Keynes South this evening. So while we're talking about Halfling, let's continue with the NHS. Let's find out what the candidates plan to do with our NHS in Milton Keynes as regards as the hospital and GP surgeries. And we'll start first of all with Andrew Pakes from Labour.
Yeah, I think this is the, on the doorstep, talking to people, going out there on the street and chatting. I think the future of the NHS and what's happening with not just the hospital but GP services, and particularly for me social care for elderly residents, is the biggest issue facing us, and completely intertwined with the future of the borough itself. I always give the example about infrastructure and expansion being broken now in the city. The prime example is the new GP surgery that is planned in the Western Expansion area near Stony Stratford. Thumbs up that it has a GP surgery alongside the 6,500 new houses. Thumbs down, it's not going to open until 2020 at the earliest. What we know about GP surgeries are people are waiting longer to get appointments. That's knocking them onto A&E, or meaning some people aren't going. We know we have a hospital that's too small. Despite 2.9 million, which is the extra investment we've had since 2010 to put 11 beds in A&E, we've still had the worst winter on record for A&E. So we've been very clear as a party. We will raise extra money. We will raise £2.5 billion to actually put our first priority, which is getting the staff into the hospital. That means more doctors and more nurses. That means lifting the cap we've currently got on training new nurses in this country, so we can actually offer young people in Britain the chance to go into nursing and some of those nursing professions. And it means getting the GPs into Milton Keynes so that we have enough staff to keep up with the size of a growing population that we've now become.
Just a reminder, the Liberal Democrats are unable to be with us this evening. We're talking about the NHS. Let's move to Samantha from the Green Party.
I think the biggest problem that the NHS has faced in the last 5 years has been the backdoor privatisation that we've seen, the outsourcing to private companies, and that's just eroded what was a cornerstone of British society. The Green Party opposes all forms of privatisation with the NHS. I'm personally signed up to support the NHS reinstatement bill, as have at least 100 other Green Party candidates. We would end privatisation and outsourcing the NHS and invest instead in more staff and bringing it back into public ownership, which is where it needs to be. Milton Keynes Hospital has had quite a lot of worries and issues around the fact that, as Andrew pointed out, it's not big enough to serve the population it has now, never mind the population that it will grow to as the new housing developments are built over the next 11 years. So something that has concerned me has been the different stories and the different coverage that it's received in local media. It's very difficult to actually try and keep up. Is it being invested in? Is it being merged with Bedford? Is it being downgraded? Nobody knows what's happening. It's very difficult as an ordinary person living in Milton Keynes to have faith. So I am personally very committed to making sure that our hospital actually stays open, can expand. There's a lot of room for it to expand because it's a low-level hospital. It could expand upwards very easily. And if I'm not elected as your MP, I'm very committed to continuing to campaign and holding whoever one of us sitting up here is elected to make sure our hospital stays open and fills the needs of people here.
Thank you, Samantha, from the Green Party. Let's move over to Vince from UKIP, talking about the NHS.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, the NHS should be protected from privatisation. Samantha's already mentioned that it's being privatised through the back door. This began with the Labour government. It's continued under the coalition government. Only a month ago, there was an £800 million private contract signed. It's continuing. The Milton Keynes Hospital was built in 1984. I think it's time for us to decide that it's not worth continuing expanding that hospital, and perhaps we should be talking about building a second hospital for the city. The rapidly growing population, we're rapidly reaching 300,000 population. A city that size, sorry, I should say town, that size, deserves more than one hospital. GP surgeries were encouraged to cut back on their hours a few years ago. Well, GPs should be working weekends. They should be doing a catch-up. And we should be encouraging more GPs into the area. Under EU border controls, for example, it's very easy for a Romanian or an East European road sweeper to come into the country than it is a doctor from Australia or the US. There's blocks on these doctors that want to come to this country to work. And as Andrew mentioned, we need to encourage more British nurses to be trained up.
Thank you, Vince. Let's move over to Steve from the Independent Party.
Yeah, thanks. It's true. We need to keep the National Health Service and we need to keep it healthy. But we're not spending in the right places. We're importing paramedics at a high cost. We're importing nurses. We should be training and getting our own UK staff in these roles. We absolutely need more GPs to take the pressure off of the services. And countrywide, there's something that is probably not going to be a popular thing to say. My brother's an ambulance driver, and he and other people in that profession are very frustrated at the cronyism in the National Health Service trusts and the top-heavy layers that are paying themselves a huge amount of money. So there's a lot of reform that we can do. There's a lot of spending in the right places that we can do in this National Health Service. But with Milton Keynes, we absolutely are lagging behind in the investment, and I'm really disappointed when I hear electioneering rhetoric about the 178 million that's being promised. If someone's promising that, or alluding that this is coming and they're doing a great job, if it doesn't come, I want them to fall on their sword, because they aren't someone I want to represent me at Westminster.
Thank you, Steve. And finally, let's move over to Iain Stewart from the Conservative Party.
There is significant additional investment going in to the NHS in Milton Keynes. One of the things that Mark Lancaster and I have fought for and won is a change to how the funding formula works here. For many, many years under governments of all colours, the funding formula for Milton Keynes lagged behind what our population demanded, and that's one of the things that's been changed. And when the budget was set for this financial year, we'd one of the top increases in the country. And at the hospital, it's not just the expansion of A&E, which is only a temporary expansion, it's not the full picture. We've recently opened a new medical school there in conjunction with Buckingham University. Later this year or early next year, there'll be a new cancer unit opened, which will give radiotherapy services here in Milton Keynes for the first time. We are putting more money into expanding the number of GP appointments. And that is part of the big investment programme that the hospital has identified. We've backed that. Some of it's already happening. More will come in the next Parliament. But we also need to have a longer-term look at the NHS. That's not the view of the government, that's from the head of the NHS, and look at how the NHS is organised, what is the right balance between hospital services and GPs. And that is essential to meet the needs of a growing population, an more elderly population, and with medical advances to take into account.
Thank you, Iain. The Beat of MK, this is MKFM live from the civic offices here at Milton Keynes Council. Tonight we've got a debate for Milton Keynes South. We've got all the parliamentary candidates with us, apart from the Lib Dems, who unfortunately can't be here this evening. We've got a live studio audience as well. Let's find out if there's anyone in the audience that's got a question. Okay, let's go over here. If you could just say your name, where you're from, and ask your question, please.
Yeah, hi, my name's David Beattie. I'm from Walton Park. I've lived in Milton Keynes for 20 years. Not very politically active. I basically saw on MKFM on their Facebook page yesterday that this debate was going to take place, so I thought I'd pop up here. I started this campaign thinking I'm going to vote Tory. Earlier this year, I just had a little bit of a health complaint. Thought, okay, contact my GP surgery. All our family have grown up using the surgery at Walnut Tree, and found to my absolute amazement that I couldn't get an appointment. It was literally 8 o'clock on the dot, 40, 50 phone calls trying to get through. Haven't been able to see a GP all that time. This really got me thinking. Spoke to one of the people in the doctor's surgery, said flippantly that they had now had 13,000 patients, and that there was talk of another GP surgery opening near us in the new area near Walton Park, but that wasn't going to happen, and kind of a shrug of the shoulders, this is what it's like. I then look on the side and see that all the GPs and meet the team and see that they're part-time. The GPs, all the ones that I know of, are all now part-time. I think I'd actually point towards Labour and say that during your time in office, allow these people to kind of get to the point where they become business owners and they just bring in their locum doctors all the time to do their work. I would just say, and I've been rushed here, that last night my son, my 20-year-old son, who can be voting for the first time, introduced us to a app called Vote Match. Went on there and it told me of the parties available in this area, I should be voting Green.
Right for that.
However, I want to vote for a winning party. So
We could win if you vote
I know,
for us.
I agree with everything you're saying. So I guess it brings me down to the two people down. I just wanted to eyeball people today and see what it was. But I really want to hear, because a little bit I've heard from Iain, it seems very much talking about almost the kind of the national point of view with regards to the health service. I want to understand, with Milton Keynes as it is now, and me experiencing a real issue with the GP and actually seeing for myself, oh my God, there really is a problem here. I'm a small business owner, I should be voting for you guys. What actually are you doing about this now? Not just in the future, but now.
Well,
Okay, we'll give everyone the opportunity, 60 seconds to answer this point, if you'd like to, starting with Iain.
Well, what we have done, no one's denying that there are pressures on GP surgeries. When I lived in Walnut Tree, I used exactly the same one. Last year, the Prime Minister announced a challenge fund for GP practices to bid for extra funding for appointments. And Mark Lancaster and I worked with the Milton Keynes Clinical Commissioning Group for their bid, which has been successful, and it's got the extra funding. And I need to check the details, but I think the Walnut Tree surgery is one of the ones that will get significant expansion in opening hours in this year. So that's something that has happened now. And we've got to keep investing in it, absolutely. The demands, even without a growing population, are going to go up and up and up. That's the demographic pressures we have. No one's denying that. But we have taken action that will address the problem in the immediate stage. But yes, there's more that needs to be done.
Is there anyone else from our candidates that would like to answer this? Steve, from the Independents.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think it's really obvious that we have to push back. No infrastructure investment in Milton Keynes means we push back on housing. It's ludicrous. And we hear quite often about everyone knowing the problem, but we've had for the last 3 years Conservatives in here that haven't done the job, all right? So I don't want to hear about everyone knowing the problem. It's not been fixed in that time. And please, don't vote tactically, vote with something you believe in, or we will never change the system, all right? If everyone... And I know it means you're going to vote Green and not for me, but please, anyone out there, do not vote tactically. You won't make any change by voting tactically in the long term.
Let's go over to Samantha from the Green Party.
Okay. Thanks for that, Steve, actually. Iain, I just wanted to address, it's really interesting that you were asked a question there and managed to do the fantastic politician's job of not actually answering it, because you were asked, what are you going to do? And you didn't. You just gave a load of politics speak. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've had that personal experience of trying to ring my GP. It's 8:30 for mine, and you ring, and the last time I tried to call it was 87 times, and then you get through and you're told, sorry, all the appointments are gone. You could come in about 4 o'clock and see if anybody doesn't turn up, or we can book you an appointment in 2 weeks. And I'm like, I'm not going to be ill in 2 weeks, and that's not very helpful. there's things that have contributed to the problem that we have with the lack of GPs, and one of the biggest problems facing NHS staff, and the reason that you have NHS staff leaving this country to go and work elsewhere when they've been trained here is because pay and conditions are terrible, because NHS staff have been denied a 1% pay rise that they campaigned for, and I was out campaigning with them last year, at the same time as MPs are getting an 11% pay rise. That puts things into perspective there. You know, their wages have fallen in real time since 2010, so we've got to look holistically. If we're going to say what are we going to do to get more GPs working in Milton Keynes and around the country, then the answer's got to be, why are they not here in the first place?
Thank you, Samantha. Let's move over to Andrew from Labour.
Yeah, here's some honest answers around it. The last Labour government didn't get everything right on the NHS around some of the issues around PFI and some of the contracts around it. Second honest answer is it's going to take a long time to fix some of these problems. I think it's good, I think it's refreshing that our health spokesperson Andy Burnham and our leadership of Labour have acknowledged and said we got things wrong, and we've learned from that. So rather than repeat the things we've done, we've looked at how we can put things forward about. And actually it'd be nice to hear current government spokespeople to apologise for some of the things they've got wrong, rather than wait until they've lost government and then can reflect on it. But it's going to take, we're a growing city, to fix it will take a long time. But actually, it's got worse since 2010. And it's going to take whoever wins to get a coalition, I think, in Milton Keynes to take on whoever's in government and to stick our elbows out. Because we know that pace of growth, the funding's not come out. So elect me and elect a Labour government, and it won't change overnight. It will only work, I think, if we have an effective city lobby to really get the resources we need in Milton Keynes. It's a national thing, but it's an MK thing as well.
OK, Vince, did you want to come back on this point?
Thank you, yeah. The two established parties are happy to remain within the EU, which means that we will continue with the same levels of mass uncontrolled immigration that we've been suffering for the last 12 months. The situation will not change. The services are under pressure by the huge population growth within the city. I'm saying things that you don't want to hear, but it's a fact. On the NHS, I think, yes, we can throw billions at it, but I think the management of the NHS needs to be moved completely away from politics, because we get this seesaw red-blue argument about how it should be run and how it should be restructured. Let's put clinical staff in control and take politics out of the NHS altogether. And on a final point, hospital car parking charges, I forgot to mention earlier. We shouldn't be paying for car parking at hospitals. It should be totally free.
OK, thanks, Vince. So you asked the question then. I can't take another question from you, but what do you make from the responses?
The first thing is, just picking up on the immigration part, for me, Milton Keynes needs people coming in. I love the fact it's expanding. I'm very proud to live here. So that part isn't an issue. It's infrastructure. And I just felt, honestly, sat here as a potential, as a voter, I found Stewart, yourself to be quite aloof. I really respected the response from this side, so I've probably made up my mind. Thank you.
All right, thanks for your input. This is a live broadcast from the civic offices here at Milton Keynes Council in conjunction with the MK News. Now, the readers of MK News have been asking their questions as well. Let's go over to James then, who's going to ask one of the questions.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, we have a question here from Ricky Oates. And he has asked, how is each party going to make sure that the people of MK who you have a duty of care to are housed properly, and that B&Bs are going to be less used?
So again, we'll do 60 seconds on this, and we'll start with the Green Party. Samantha.
OK. The Green Party have a commitment to building 500,000 new social housing. That's very important that we point out it's social housing, not just any old houses, over the course of the next Parliament, because we need to address the fact that people can't afford to buy houses, and at the moment they actually can't even afford to rent privately. There's an enormous amount of insecurity alongside the astronomical prices of renting. So that's a manifesto pledge that we have there. Specifically related to Milton Keynes, there's a plan in place to build, I think it's 26,000 houses over the next 11 years in Milton Keynes, with this government pledge of saying that 30% of it should be, inverted commas, affordable housing. Now, the problem with that affordable definition is that it says it's 30% of market value. We say that should mean that people can afford to live in it, which is quite a lot less than 30% of market value when market value is too high. So rent controls are a big thing that we bring in.
Thank you, Samantha. That's Samantha from the Green Party. Let's go to Andrew Pakes from Labour.
We need to go back to a partnership approach in this city. We used to have a good principle that, and it's council policy, that 30% of all new estates are affordable, and that can be a mix of renting, part ownership, buying. What we've seen happen since 2010 with the planning changes and other, in the name of scrapping red tape, much more power has been given to developers so they can drop the amount of affordable being built in this city. That's a real disaster for us. When we get the mix right, building some of the private ownership and giving youngsters, like we've said, cutting the stamp duty for first-time buyers, that helps those. But it's also about renting. So we've said we will take action to regulate the private rented sector. As a council, Milton Keynes has just announced, or been announcing, we're starting building council houses again for the first time in 20 years. But we sell council houses as well, and most of that money goes down to Westminster and is never seen in here. If we're going to have right to buy, we need to keep the money in the city to be building new council houses as well. We've got to have a partnership and we've got to have a mix.
Andrew Pakes from Labour. Just a reminder that the Liberal Democrats were invited this evening, but unfortunately they couldn't make tonight's live debate. So let's move over to Steve from the Independents.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what Andrew's saying. But we do need to increase the supply. I mean, so supply drives prices down naturally. We can't control the landlords, but we can control the supply so that they compete with each other. And it's ludicrous to think that we're selling off council housing. It's not solving the problem at all. Milton Keynes, for people to be able to afford to live here, we've got to address their wage. We've got to give people wages that mean they can afford to buy the houses that are here.
Okay, thank you. Steve, let's move over to Vincent from UKIP.
Yes, we need to build more social housing, we need to build more affordable housing, we need to take more control on major housing developments because, as Andrew says, developers are given a free rein. The right to buy scheme, yes, it would be nice to think that everyone had the right to buy their own homes, but unless we can insist that for every house that's sold there's one built, I don't see it working. Private landlords need to be addressed on accepting housing benefit because apparently 40% of private landlords refuse housing benefit. We should change the law to force that issue. And local people should have more say on private developments, housing developments. The private developers are refusing to meet this 30% of social housing criteria. We ought to insist that they listen to the people more, maybe through the local council.
Thank you, Vince. And finally, let's move over to Iain Stewart from Conservative.
Well, as others have said, the first thing is increasing the number of homes being built of all shapes and sizes. And we have our plan in Milton Keynes, and the government has worked with Milton Keynes Council to unlock some of the planned development that, with the financial difficulties in 2008, 2009, held up some of these developments. So those are starting to get going. When the Conservatives ran Milton Keynes Council a couple of years ago, we started again the council house building programme, and the Labour Party have continued that in office. But one area I would like us to do more on, and I'm a bit critical of my own party and not pushing this as much, is significantly extending the shared ownership model, where people initially buy a very small part of the equity, and as their career develops and their family develops, they can buy a bigger share. I'd like us to do much more of that, and that's one thing I'll be pushing for if I get back in.
Thank you, Iain. Okay, this is a live election broadcast in association with MK News. It's MKFM. People have been asking questions via MK News. Let's just have one more from James.
Yeah, very simple one here from David. Yes or no, should we leave the EU?
So I think we'll go to UKIP first.
Yes.
Okay, that was Vince, thank you. Samantha from the Greens?
No.
Okay, Andrew Pakes, Labour?
No.
Steve from Independents?
No.
And finally, Iain Stewart?
Yes, if it stays as it is, but no, if we can change it.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone out in our studio this evening that would like to ask a question? We'll be going to the news at 8 o'clock, so we've literally just got a few minutes to sneak in another question. Okay, again, if you could just say your name, where you're from, and ask your question, please.
Chloe Bowman, Campbell Park. When the election was starting, I was looking... When the election started, I was looking for the climate change aspect for all the parties, and wondering how many people are thinking ahead and thinking globally. Because it's okay for us to think of our local MP, but actually we have a government, and the government interacts with other governments. And I wondered what everybody's policy is for getting us to what we pledged to do, which is 80% reduction in our carbon emissions by 2050.
Thank you very much. 60 seconds then, starting with the Green Party.
Yeah, this is something that I'm really, really glad that you brought up. Obviously, the Green Party were quite big on climate change issues. And actually, I think it's one reason it's very important that we stay in the EU. Something that I think is an enormous threat to climate change and any efforts from all sectors of society to combat our contribution to it is actually the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP. There's so many pieces of legislation that are going to be woven into it, which are a huge, damaging, big, enormous threat, not just to our democratic process, but to any efforts to combat climate change. We need to be investing in renewable energies. We need to be moving away from fossil fuels. They need to stay in the ground. We've got to be looking at public transport over individual car use, and we need to be looking at how we as families are contributing through our use of electricity, gas, water, through insulation of homes. There's so many different ways that we can work together, and we have to start doing it now before it's a crisis on our doorsteps. I'm really glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Let's move over to Iain Stewart then from Conservatives.
It is right. You know, as MPs, we are both local representatives and the voice on the national stage. And one of my areas of particular interest is transport. I've been on the Transport Committee and worked with the Secretary of State. And one of the things we've been pushing very hard is moves to more environmentally friendly transport, particularly what's called ULEV, ultra-low emissions vehicles. Milton Keynes is one of the pilot areas for developing this technology. And if I'm re-elected, that's something I very much wish to consider. Related to transport, and also something we're doing in Milton Keynes, is research into what's called smart cities. And that's using new technology to be able to deliver public transport and utilities as efficiently as possible and reduce some of the waste that is made in the current distribution systems.
Thank you, Iain. Let's move over to Steve then from the Independent Party.
Yes, I think for me, the way you fix climate change is actually to make it relevant and impacting on the individual. And the best way to do that is to put initiatives in place that save people money, that reduce their use of power that isn't green. So I've said this before, I'm amazed that with the quantity of new build houses that we have here in Milton Keynes, that every house doesn't have solar panels and ground source heating. There's stuff that can be designed in right at the beginning, and that you make sense. So there's some simple things that we can do, and if it's personally impacting and beneficial, then you get the ultimate achievement of positive impact on climate change.
Thank you, Steve from the Independents. Let's go to Vince from UKIP.
Okay, I'm going to stand out here as the odd one out in this argument. For every expert that claims that climate change, we're having an effect on the climate of this planet, there's an expert that says we're not at all.
No, that's not true, I'm afraid, Vince.
We're being forced, you have your views, I have mine.
No, 7% of climate scientists agree.
We're being forced at the moment to close perfectly good coal-fired power stations. For every one that we close, China are opening 2 or 3. Until we get the globe acting together, why are we taking a lead? 12 of our 17 nuclear power stations are due for renewal, and they haven't been. Wind turbines are intermittent. They're not the solution. They're not the way forward. It takes 2,000 wind turbines to produce the same as a nuclear power station.
Thank you, Vince. Let's move over to Andrew Pakes, finally then Labour.
This is a hugely important issue. My meeting prior to this one was members of the Bangladeshi community in Milton Keynes, and Bangladesh is at the forefront of this. So we can cite whatever experts we like, but if you speak to people with friends and neighbours back in Bangladesh to see what's actually happening with water and sea level rising, it affects us because it affects communities in Milton Keynes. So things we need to do internationally and things we need to do at home. You know, we've come a long way since David Cameron hugged a husky. You know, we had great promise of things that were going to happen, and all that's happened is the husky's been put down, I think, over the last 5 years. So internationally, absolutely right, we've got to stay in Europe. If we want to tackle this on the international scale, we've got to work with our near neighbours and internationally for the agreements that are coming up later in the year in Paris to get that done. But also not just be in Europe, but be active participants, not just shouting from the sidelines. And that's what we've done. We've isolated ourselves in Europe rather than being proactive players in this. If we want to change that scene, we've got to get out there because other countries have got to come with us.
Thank you, Andrew. So we just literally got a minute before we go to the news. You asked a question. Just what do you think of the responses?
Well, I think the Green Party probably has got a zero carbon Britain vision, and I'm not sure that the other parties have actually got down to getting out for 2050.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for your question. Well, we're heading for the news now. We're going to be back after 8 o'clock with part 2 of this. This is a live election broadcast for Milton Keynes South. Just remind, if you want to tweet us, you can do that at MKFM, at MK News, and use the hashtag MKElection. We'll be back after this right here on MKFM. That's Professor Green on the beat of MK. This is MKFM. Hello, this is Darren D, live from the civic offices here at Milton Keynes Council. It's a live election debate. We've got Milton Keynes South here. We've got the parliamentary candidates. You've just missed the first hour of the broadcast if you're just tuning in. Got another hour to go. We're going to be asking your questions via Twitter, also your responses as well to MK News. Got a live studio audience. So in the second part then, let's kick off with education. Current situation is that we have got new schools being built, schools being extended, but again many parents just can't get their kids into the nearest school or their first choice of schools. So again, let's give all the candidates 60 seconds to let us know what they're going to do about education in Milton Keynes. Just a reminder that the Liberal Democrats couldn't be with us tonight. Lisa Smith sends her apologies. So let's start on education then with Andrew Pakes.
You're picking all the right topics tonight, Darren, to get us talking about it. Again, it does. You know, I remember growing up, we used to see the sight of an estate with a school in the middle, and then we'd build the houses around it. You know, I before E, it's broken down yet again. We're now seeing schools coming in later in development, which creates a whole crazy world of where do you put the, you know, which children goes where, you know, and we're building schools which are just too small. You know, over half of our primary schools in this city are already fit to bursting point, and we need to get the funding in to be able to address that. But we need to do more. It's not just school places. I think it's about school standards as well. We've said very clearly we will cap class sizes at 30 to stop them creeping up as they've started to in some places. We will ensure that all teachers in classroom are qualified or working towards being qualified to end this big growth in unqualified teachers in our schools, and we will end the disaster of the free schools programme to make sure the money can be spent where we need school places and not on vanity projects. That means we can invest in the childcare and nursery provision, we can get the money into schools, and we can do what we've said, which is protect in real terms the entire school budget from early years to the end of further education and sixth form to ensure schools are getting the money in the city they need.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's go over to Iain Stewart from Conservative.
Thank you. There is a need to have more good school places in Milton Keynes, and it's one of the things I've been working on with colleagues on the local authority. For example, Oxley Park Academy Junior School, very popular, very high standards, but there are more and more parents wanting to get their children in there. And working with, I say, my colleagues on Milton Keynes Council, we've worked to get extra provision, another building put in there. But it is about raising standards too. And the reforms that Michael Gove and Nicky Morgan have put in place are about raising our school standards so that we can compete internationally. Because if we don't, we're going to be overtaken by many other countries, particularly those in the Far East. But what I also want to do is, as the MP, is continue to push for making the choices available to students as wide as possible. We're too much focused on getting into university or nothing, and I want to continue to work on boosting apprenticeships and other vocational and further education, and that's something not just for for secondary schools. You've got to do that at primary stage as well.
Thank you, Iain. Let's go then to Steve from the Independents.
Yeah, so the subject is my heart. I'm a governor of an outstanding school, and there's actually some incredible quality going on in Milton Keynes. We have some outstanding teaching schools. We do suffer from great overcrowding. Andrew's absolutely right. The schools were never built for the size of population, and I've seen collisions between local authorities trying to expand schools and coming a cropper with planning. It's just not the way to do it, and it comes full circle to investment. We cannot grow on the cheap. We have got to fight tooth and nail to get the proper investment to get these schools running in Milton Keynes with the right quantity of places. We have got the quality, we need the investment.
Let's go over to Vince then from UKIP.
Yeah, totally agree. We need to build more schools, and very fast. We're under great pressure from the rapidly growing population we have. We desperately need to build schools quickly. On improved education, we think that schools should be encouraged to become grammar schools. The grammar school system should never have been taken out of this country. It would give all children the ability to strive to better education, and not just the privileged few. Student tuition fees is an issue during this election campaign. The average student debt now stands at £44,000, and this is ridiculous. We think that important subjects for students to go on to get real jobs, the tuition fees should be waived. For example, degrees in science, technology, engineering, maths and medicine.
Thank you. And finally, let's move over to Samantha from the Green Party.
I have to say, Vince, you've talked about important subjects there. I think most university students would say that all subjects are important, which is why we support zero tuition fees for all university students. We've also got to think about further education. There have been massive cuts to further education funding because, unlike secondary funding, it's not ring-fenced. Adult learning in particular, we've lost 1 million adult learners since 2010. In terms of schools, academies and free schools are basically backdoor privatisation of our school system, because we now see things like the UK's biggest arms trader being given sponsorship of academies like the one in Cumbria. So we want to end the Free Schools Academies programme. We want schools back under local authority control so that they can be in charge of allocating places and of approving plans for building and expanding schools where the need is. We want to see teachers' workload reduced by scrapping Ofsted and replacing it with a supportive, collaborative system. We want to see teachers being able to do what they do best, which is teaching. And by teaching, I don't mean teaching to the test. I mean nurturing students and pupils of all ages to reach their potential.
Thank you, Samantha. That's Samantha from the Green Party. We've been talking about education. So this is a live broadcast on MKFM in association with MK News. Next, we're going to go to a question from the MK News. Readers have been tweeting and emailing MK News. Let's go over to James.
Okay, we have another question here from an MK News reader. The question is, as we heard earlier this month, the council won't be financially supporting the YMCA homeless hostel after this year. What do you think your party can do to help with the homelessness problem that Milton Keynes is currently facing?
So we're 60 seconds again. We'll start with Vince on this one from UKIP.
We have in our manifesto that we would help the homeless find housing by raising a housing charter so that homeless people can go along and register their need for housing benefit. At the moment they can't do that without an address, so that's the main method that we would get the homeless taken care of. Spending so much money on foreign aid, that money should be redirected to help the people that in need in this country and not in other countries. And again, building more social and affordable housing would help those people.
Okay, let's move over to Steve then for the Independents.
Yeah, so it's a real serious problem. I was waiting in the reception at YMCA to chat to some of the people in there, and there was a constant cycle of like youngsters that have to turn up to see if there was a place available, and when there wasn't, they were just sleeping out on the streets, which is absolutely disgraceful in a growing town like this, where we're proud of our growth and our community. So at a Milton Keynes level, we actually have to get our arms around this at a local level and deal with it now. This isn't a long-term strategic thing. It's not going to be fixed by increasing the housing supply. These are people in need right now, and they're at the bottom of the employment chain, and we've got to deal with it locally.
Thank you, Steve. Let's go over now to Samantha from the Green Party.
Okay, there's two strains to answering this question. The first one is, what do we do to tackle homelessness as it is at the moment? And a lot of that, again, comes back to funding. Local councils have had their grants from central government cut, which is where the budget cuts are coming from, and that's why the YMCA, Age UK, the CAB faced having their funding pulled in this year's budget, and why it will happen again next year, and we'll have this whole discussion again. So we need to increase the amount of funding that council get from central government, so that those services that help people who are homeless and that give people advice when they're facing homelessness can actually access the services and be protected from being in that situation at all. We also need to look at why are people becoming homeless. You know, increasing rents, but also there's this very punitive bedroom tax. I read a news story just yesterday of a man who's lost all of his toes to frostbite because he's had to sleep in a tent throughout winter because he lost his home because of the bedroom tax. Scrap the bedroom tax now. Stop people becoming homeless in the first place.
Let's move over to Andrew Pakes from Labour.
Yep, I'm very clear that one of the first votes I will take if I'm elected as our MP in Milton Keynes South is to abolish the bedroom tax. 1,400 families in this city are affected by this, driving them into debt with no affordable housing for them to move into. And I think the government should be ashamed of itself for pushing ahead of it, regardless of the facts. But in terms of the homelessness, I think it is about the individuals themselves and increasing our housing. We've discussed a bit about how we get more affordable housing and more affordable rents in place. But it's also about supporting the people, many of them in difficult positions. I find another one of the most shameful things this government has done is it has consistently, year after year, cut the children's mental health budget and young people's mental health budget. And we all know on this panel, from having attended at the YMCA last week or the week before, that mental health is a key part of giving support to it. And for this government to be cutting it year on year, they are piling misery upon misery for young people trying to do the right thing. So give them jobs, give them support, but make sure the health and social care is there for them as well as the actual homelessness provision.
Let's go to Iain, Stewart, Conservative.
Well, I've worked very closely with YMCA over the last few months. Their position is actually there is a good future for them. They have their own development plan, which will actually make them not only self-sufficient financially, but will actually generate some revenue for Milton Keynes Council. And the problem was the initial budget proposals from the council would have cut off their funding until they could get this plan in place. Now, thankfully, working with local councillors and the YMCA and other groups, we managed to get the council to revise its plans, and hopefully now it will have that bridging money until its development plans can come to fruition. And I say that will ensure a long-term future for YMCA and generate extra revenue for the council. And if I'm re-elected, I'll continue to engage with them and make sure that happens.
Thank you, Iain. Okay, I'm going to take a question from the studio audience. I must say that if you're from a political party, you can't actually ask a question, so you need to be a genuine member of the audience. So over to you.
I found it a little worrying that when the question of costs are considered for various benefits, that the foreign aid would be completely eliminated or cancelled by the UKIP party. Now that is very, very worrying in the sense that, I mean, has the party taken into consideration that there will be repercussions of that? You may have additional costs by people, who are in difficult situations in other countries who will come into this country, and to bear in mind, especially about the people who have lost their lives trying to cross from Libya into Italy, and the consequences of that.
Sorry, sir, I should have asked your name. If you just say your name and where you're from.
Fazal Kunka from Milton Keynes, Connemara.
Okay, fantastic. And who would you like to answer that question? Everyone or someone in particular?
Well, to the UKIP representative, but I'd like the other candidates just to say something about that.
All right, then we'll start with you, Vince.
Our nation spends the second highest amount on foreign aid in the world, second to the US, and you can appreciate they're a larger economy than us. We believe 0.7% of GDP is too high. 0.2% of GDP would satisfy emergency aid, which of course we would always honour. And with the Nepal disaster in the last couple of days, of course, we have to help those countries. But we're funding, for example, private concerns are within the countries that we're supplying aid to are with highly paid directors creaming off the money that's going there. And obviously India, a space race. Why should we be contributing to a country that can afford a space race? So we're not saying we're stopping foreign aid, we're just getting more realistic about it.
Okay, is there anyone else on the panel that'd like to come back on this, Samantha, from the Greens?
I think it's extraordinary that UKIP have this anti-immigration stance at the same time as saying we need to cut foreign aid. It is true. I wonder if perhaps something that they haven't considered is how much we need to be looking at our role in all the conflicts and all the issues around the world that are contributing to people needing to flee for their lives. And that's something that the UK is not just complicit in, but actively involved in through things like the arms trade. Yes, there is an argument to be made for what happens to the foreign aid. How is it being used? Is it being used by regimes that are actually causing more harm for the people who live in the countries? Should we be reviewing how we support countries? And our Green Party actually supports increasing our foreign aid to 1% of GDP and making sure that it goes towards helping people who need it. And actually, just in terms of the impact globally, what that means when you end conflict, when we take ourselves out of the arms trade and we instead put ourselves into helping people, that actually stops people needing to flee their lives and losing their lives in that very process.
Thank you, Samantha, from the Green Party. Let's go over to Iain, Stewart, Conservative.
Thank you. I've been able to support us maintaining and increasing our spending on overseas aid, even in these difficult financial times, for three reasons. Firstly, for humanitarian relief when there's a natural disaster, as we've seen this week. We are a comparatively rich country. We have a moral duty to support those whose lives are being wiped out. Secondly, a part of the programme is sensibly about investing for the future, be it, for example, in health vaccination programmes, which will lessen the demand for overseas aid in future years. And thirdly, it is about helping our national security and stable world order, because if we can, Britain has a unique position given our history. By using our soft power, we can help stabilize countries which, if they disintegrated, could pose a threat to our security and lead to other costs and problems. So I think for those three reasons, it is legitimate to maintain our spending on overseas aid.
That's Iain Stewart from Conservative. Let's move over to Steve from the Independent Party.
So, as a British citizen, I'm really proud that we are part of a world community and that we do go out and look to support where it's needed. And there's a very practical sense in fixing the problem at source rather than letting the problem come to you. So you don't even have to be a tree hugger to respect the fact that being good to people sometimes means they're good to you. And I think aid should be to help people get back on their feet, whether it's our welfare aid in our country or whether it's in the world community. So that they can then be more capable of helping themselves and fighting against their own problems if they under in a tyrannical regime. So yeah, I'm for keeping our aid, and it's not through any like soft reason. I think I'm proud that we do it, and it makes sense.
And finally, let's move over to Andrew Pakes from Labour.
I'm incredibly proud to be a citizen and live in a country which is committed 0.7% of GDP to aid. I think it doesn't just speak to our past, I think it speaks to our national interest in the future. It says something about the kind of country we are. By 2050, there'll be another 2 billion people on this planet, and how we feed them, heat them and water them will be major issues for this century. If we do not help, it will get things wrong, it will lead to conflict, it will lead to further humanitarian things. We have the ability to act today as a country being relatively prosperous to pay something into that to help other countries get to a level of development and develop themselves to help steer the path of this world. If we get it wrong, it will impact not just on us morally in terms of what we do, but actually an impact because we will then end up with more crises where we have to step in, sort it out of root cause because it is morally the right thing to do, but economically and in terms of our interests, it's also the right thing to do.
Andrew, thank you very much. Vince, UKIP, I believe you just want to come back very quickly.
Well, I wanted to come back on what Samantha said. UKIP is not anti-immigration. We just do not agree with uncontrolled immigration from within Europe. My background, I grew up in northwest London in a multicultural society that was working. The levels of immigration back then were correct, it worked, and many of my friends were immigrants. So I'm not anti-immigration, the party is not anti-immigration.
Thank you, Vince. Right, let's just spend a minute or so then talking about the policies then for transport and also to bring rural areas into that. Obviously, people that live in the rural communities do struggle from time to time to find a bus route, and also they need to spend additional money on fuel. So let's find out about the policies then for transport in cooperation with rural areas. So we're going to Andrew Pakes on this first of all.
Yeah, I think the issue of buses affects rural and urban areas. You know, we often like to think of ourselves as a modern car city, but actually the number of people who rely on other forms of transport or don't have access to a private car, or the cost of petrol. And it's not just the fuel duty escalator, it's VAT which put up cost of petrol as well. Increasing number of people who live on it and rely on it. Look, I don't think the deregulated bus market, for a bit of jargon, has worked for us. If you look at London and look at other places where local communities and local councils have much greater powers determining the frequency, the quality, the routes of our buses, we can do that. We can't repeat entirely what they do in London because it's much bigger. But we as a party have said we want to give councils and local communities a lot more power to work with the bus companies to determine what a good bus service looks like. And then we can talk about the money we need to put into that system. 450 million has gone from local bus grants since 2010. It's no wonder councils are having problems with their subsidies.
Thank you, Andrew. That's Andrew from the Labour Party. Let's move over to Samantha from the Green Party.
Yeah, I think in Milton Keynes we've had a lot of personal experience of this when we had to face the council having to cut almost £1 million from our bus services, the subsidies for the bus services in Milton Keynes, which thankfully they were able to not do. And that would have meant a lot of people living in the outlying areas would have lost their bus service entirely. It would have meant evening services running from the city centre out to the more rural areas would have gone. So people working in the shops there, finishing work at 8, 9 o'clock at night, then can't get home. We need more investment in bus services nationally. We need to get more people using public transport instead of driving their cars around, not just because it's better for them personally, but also for the sake of the environment. In a wider transport sense, we need to see the railways back in public hands. Privatisation of the railways has been a disaster with the massive hike in fares and the decrease in the quality of service. So, yeah, back in public hands and more local accountability, especially when it comes to bus service subsidies.
That's Samantha from the Green Party. This is the Beat of MK. It's MKFM, a live election broadcast. We've got the candidates for Milton Keynes South with us. It's in conjunction with the MK News. We're talking about transport in rural areas at the moment. Let's hear now from Vince from UKIP.
It's back to the good old government cuts, isn't it? I mean, the local council has to trim back on bus services because central government would rather give our money away to the EU than spend it on its own people. That's the basis of it. I agree with Samantha. Privatisation didn't work. Public transport should be nationally owned. The most successful rail line in the country was nationally run for a few years, but it's just been handed over to Virgin. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Vince. Let's go to Steve from the Independent Party.
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what Samantha said, but I think it's even simpler than that. Yes, it's vital for people in the outlying areas and we want to improve the transport, but let's not just tinker with it. Let's make the transport work for everyone. There's a huge amount of people that commute around Milton Keynes to stations as part of their working life. And I know personally, when I first came to Milton Keynes, I thought, fantastic, I can hop on a bus up to the station and go to work. But could I? Absolutely not. So let's not tinker with it. Let's actually make it a big policy, and if everyone is able to use this, it will work and everyone will benefit, and we'll have a really strong, robust system.
Thank you. Steve from the Independent Party. Finally, let's go to Iain Stewart then from the Conservatives.
Having an efficient transport network is absolutely critical for both the country's long-term economic health and Milton Keynes' economic health. And what the government has tried to do is put our investment programme for transport on a long-term basis. In railways, we're investing 38 billion over the next 5 years in upgrading the system. For roads, we're moving the Highways Agency onto the same basis so that it can plan for the long term. We also need to innovate for the future, and again Milton Keynes is at the cutting edge of that. We have the Transport Catapult here. We've got the Open University Smart Cities programme that's looking at driverless pods and how we can use technology to improve transport. Finally, for the rural areas, one thing we have done is increase significantly the funding for community bus networks. So if a regular service can't service a rural area, there is this other option.
Thank you, Iain. So just a reminder that the Liberal Democrats couldn't be with us this evening. Apart from that, we've got all the rest of the parliamentary candidates for Milton Keynes South. So tonight's broadcast on MKFM is in association with the MK News. Let's go for another question from the readers from James.
It's quite a topical one given some of the recent events. Should Milton Keynes lower its speed limit on the grid roads?
And we'll go over to Vince from UKIP on this one.
I don't think they should, no. I think the grid road system has worked perfectly for years, and I don't see a need for change.
Iain Stewart, Conservative.
I don't favour a blanket reduction in speed limits, but I think there are one or two areas where road safety has to be improved. Now that might be lowering the speed, it might be introducing left-only turns out of some grid squares or some other mechanism like that, but I think those have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis rather than having a blanket reduction.
Andrew Pakes from the Labour Party.
Yeah, I think it does need to be looked at very carefully. We don't want to rush into things and make the mistakes we've done in the past. I'll give you the example of when the council decided to save money by switching lights off at night, which everyone said would be a disaster, and then the coroner, after 2 deaths, told us it was dangerous and we had to put the lights back on. You know, when we talk about the cuts or penny pinching, it sometimes has consequences, and the coroner was very clear about that. The council's got a review of it at the moment. It's looking at all those issues, not just the speed limits, it's some of those right-hand turns where you're expected to cut across dual carriageways and get into some of those states. If it's about human life, if it's about getting about the city, we've got to look about it. I'm not going to preempt what the council's review will be, but I think if those recommendations do suggest we need to look at speed limits, you know, we're going to protect the grid system, but reduce the speed limits, then I think all of us have a duty to take those recommendations seriously.
Samantha from the Greens.
Yeah, I think Andrew's raised some really good points about taking on board recommendations. You know, on the grid road system, Milton Keynes is kind of unique in its grid road system. So, you know, what the Green Party say in terms of speed limits specifically is looking at built-up residential areas and reducing the speed limit there to 20 miles an hour, and then looking at reducing collisions and road danger in that way. Road danger and the causes of injuries and deaths in other areas, there's a lot of different factors. You know, we have to be realistic and talk about drink driving, and that's a real problem today. We need to be bringing the tolerance level down to that to as close as zero is practical. Absolutely no tolerance for drink driving there at all. Traffic is another issue as well. When you have more vehicles on the roads, you know, logically become more dangerous. Reducing traffic on the roads, reducing lorry presence on the roads by making the railways more viable for freight, for example, is something that's in our manifesto as a commitment. So, yeah, there's lots of different things to look at in terms of reducing road danger. Speed limits, not necessarily the only answer, but I think they do definitely have a role to play.
Thank you, Samantha. And finally, Steve from the Independents.
Yeah, so I think we have to respond to you know, evidence of accidents and so on. But I think there's a lot of accidents that happen where people are driving above the limit, and if we discover that this is the case, then it's about enforcement and preventative measures. And that may be people hate it, they don't like to see them, but it may be that cameras and other mechanisms of enforcement would get people using the road to the correct speed limit in a responsible fashion.
Thank you, Steve, from the Independents. So is there anyone else in our audience that would like to ask a question that's not associated with a political party? So let's just make our way over. So if you could just say your name, where you're from, and your question, please.
Tim Skelton from Downhead Park. On May the 7th, the electors of both constituencies will be asked to vote in the referendum on the neighbourhood plan for Central Milton Keynes. What do the candidates think of the plan, and will they be supporting it?
So first of all, let's go to Andrew Pakes.
Yep, I will be casting my vote in favour of it. Look, to be honest, I'm a bit nonplussed by it. I think it's a really important piece of work. I think it's focused on the businesses and residents in the CMK area. The biggest issue I get on the doorstep from outside of CMK is people saying, what's this other election about? You know, I think we've got a real difficulty that if this is about a process of binding in public support for about a neighbourhood plan and about what the future looks like, we're now having to have a referendum across a whole borough in which a good chunk of people don't feel they were part of that story. We are where we are. It's an inelegant process. I think the overall result looks like it's a good one, and I will be casting my vote as a resident for it. If it gets the result in the business and resident community, then it will go ahead. But I think there are lots of lessons to learn about the elegance of involving people and how people aren't quite sure what it's really about.
Iain Stewart from the Conservatives.
I still want to look through some of the documents, but from what I've seen so far, I will also be voting in favour. I think it's a good building block for taking forward the centre of Milton Keynes. I say a slight caveat, I still want to read some of the detail behind the headlines, but what I've seen so far, I like it and will be voting for it. Steve,
for the Independents.
Yeah, I've looked at the plan and it certainly makes sense. But I do agree with the other comments. I didn't know about the referendum until it was upon me. And when I went to find the material, there was good quality material and it explained it perfectly. So I do think we've got a problem with information getting out there to people in advance. If a lot of people only know about this when they've been informed about an election and a referendum, then they're not really being informed. But yes, the plan looks good and I'll vote for it.
Thank you. Vince from UKIP.
Yeah, I totally agree with everyone. It's a good plan. I would vote for it on the basis that there was further consultation with the public. There's hundreds of pages to read on the consultation document. I think that's too much for the people to take in all at once. But the basis of the idea is very good.
Samantha from the Greens.
I actually haven't made my mind up yet about how to vote. I've read some of the consultation documents, like you say, the hundreds and hundreds of pages, which is really off-putting because it's enormous. I've read the outline of the plan on the Central Milton Keynes Council website, which makes it sound fantastic, but it also reads a little bit like a sales pitch. Part of, to be honest with you, what's informing my lack of decision at the moment, there's a cynical part of me that says, if this was a really, really good plan for Milton Keynes, we'd have heard a lot more about it from the council by now. It almost feels a little bit like it's being snuck through because so many people haven't even heard that it's happening. And that makes me a little bit suspicious. From what I've read in the document, I'm slightly concerned about the emphasis on increasing the corporate retail presence in Milton Keynes, which is something I think we need to be perhaps moving away from and supporting small businesses instead. Some of the bits in there, you know, the increase in public transport, that appeals obviously, but in all honesty, I just haven't made my mind up. It's so big and so confusing. There's been such a lack of communication on it. I don't know.
Thank you, Samantha. So this is a live broadcast on MKFM in association with MK News. If you'd like to tweet us, you could do that at MKFM, at MK News, using the hashtag MK Election. The Liberal Democrats can't be with us this evening. Lisa Smith sends her apology. Also, Iain Stewart has squeezed tonight's debate in as well and needs to leave shortly. So what I will do, Iain, if it's okay with you, is just bring up our next topic, and then once you've answered that, if you need to go, then by all means, please do so. So let's find out now about your policies for local policing. So, Iain, over to you.
Well, we've seen a marked reduction in crime in Milton Keynes over the last period, and that has happened in the period of when we've had to look very carefully at budget cuts, because the police, like everything else, we have to live within our means. But going forward, I think there is more scope for in one direction. I think police should become more local and powers devolve down to individual officers at a town level. But some powers and cooperation has to go higher than the current county structure. and looking at shared procurement, shared services, and co-location with some of the other emergency services. Something I've been looking at is how the 3 emergency services effectively operate together. Now, they've made big improvements there, but I still think there's better synergies that can be done. So that's what I'll be looking at if I'm re-elected.
Thank you, Iain, and thanks again for your time this evening. Let's move over to Steve from the Independents.
Yeah, so everyone worries about lack of policing and underfunding for sure, and I always worry about the security of our wonderful redways, which are a fantastic asset to the city. And much as it displeases me, I would be in favour of more monitoring of the redways, even if it comes to cameras, even if it comes to more mobile units that can get around the redways to make people feel that little bit more comfortable and know that someone is looking out for them. So yes, there's a general policing thing that we absolutely need, but I do think that we've got a fantastic asset in these redways, and I would like my family, when they're out, when they're walking, when they're on their bikes, to feel that actually there's someone out there that's watching out for them, and that the bad guys will have to think twice.
Thank you, Steve. Let's go to Vincent at UKIP.
It's not really good enough to say that crime is down. OK, that's good news, but it's as a result, I think, of the hard work that the police force put in the first place. They are suffering cuts. Thames Valley have to lose another 147 officers in the next 3 years. If you talk to anyone in the police force, they will tell you that they're struggling to cope and keep up with the demand on their services. And the Police and Crimes Commissioner position should be scrapped. I think there's a huge saving to be made there. It was an experiment that hasn't worked, so let's save that money.
Okay, and Samantha from the Green Party.
Okay, I think there's 2 things to think about when you come to talking about policing and crime. Firstly, something that I don't think many people realise is that the number of frontline police officers has dropped by 30%. That's a huge drop. So they're having to do more with less funding and less people actually on there. Scrapping police crime commissioners, very, very important move. Return the control of policing to local government. But when we talk about crime and policing, something that we don't very often think about is what are the causes of crime? What are the social contexts that lead somebody to break the law? And just some more things to throw out there is that 60% of offenders have no qualifications at all. 65% of them have numeracy levels below those expected of an 11-year-old. There's a larger social problem happening here which is creating this issue we have with crime, and we need to think about preventative measures, not just addressing the problem as it stands. So we need better youth services to stop people falling into that pattern in the first place. We need better education. We need to be investing in people. A huge contributor to the rates of crime is poverty. If you lift people out of poverty, if you educate them, if you provide public services there for them and invest in those services instead of cutting them, you reduce the rate of crime. You reduce the need for police officers. You reduce the amount of work on their shoulders.
Thank you, Samantha. And finally, Andrew Pakes from Labour.
Yeah, it's about crime and it's about community safing, and we're absolutely clear as a party that our top priority is about protecting neighbourhood policing. I defy any of us as political representatives on the panel to say we've knocked on the door of police officers in this city during this election and they would tell us everything's going fine, because it's not. Every police officer I've spoken to, which has been quite a few, have talked about pressures on their pensions, pressures on service, cutbacks to actual staffing levels. So we've got real pressure there. We've lost 17,000 police officers across England since this government came to power. And there's a trick that happens when Iain speaks, and that's he tells you about some mystical future offer, but he never tells you about what his voting record is. And this election should be about holding people to account. So we have an MP who has voted for those 17,000 officers to be cut. We have an MP that has voted for a costly, wastely police and crime commissioner who is unaccountable to the people in Milton Keynes and stuffing the cash in his pockets for his salary because it is not about frontline policing. We've said we'd get rid of that. We'd said we'd actually protect frontline policing and actually put accountability back into local people. But there are other savings to be made. this government has refused to put up for 5 years now the cost of getting a gun licence, so that me as a taxpayer and everyone else who pays their taxes listening to this show have to fund people who want gun licences. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a gun licence, but if you want one, pay the full cost. We have wasted £5 million of taxpayers' money over the last 5 years in Thames Valley, actually subsidising those. Let's do sensible reforms and get the money into policing.
Andrew, thanks very much. I'm going to give Iain Stewart the opportunity to come back on the points that you raised there.
Well, just the simple fact that the number of frontline police officers in Milton Keynes has gone up, not down.
Are you denying that Thames Valley are going to actually sack a load of them? They're going to sell off Bletchley Police Station, they've shut police stations, and we're seeing police officers cut to the bone.
The number of police officers has gone up. And yes,
you voted for, Iain. Your voting record belies what you're saying right now. That's not a contribution you've made to Milton Keynes
yes,
as our
it
MP.
Is.
Are you including PCSOs in that?
No, that's frontline police officers.
Okay.
So the facts, those are the facts. And yes, all public services have to look at how they can deliver their services as efficiently as possible. And that means sometimes co-locating fire service and police service in the same place.
So by co-locating, you mean closing stations?
There isn't a magic money tree at the end of the garden that can do all the things you want to do. Yes, we've had to make some tough decisions, but at the end of the day, the number of frontline officers is up and crime is down, and I'm happy to stand on that record.
It's not about a magic money tree. It's about taking account of the actions you've done, and you've repeatedly done it this evening. You told us how wonderful MK College was, and you voted to cut its budget by 22%. 2 months ago, you announced £1 million cut for the college. There will be students turning up to our college in September who will be turned away because of your actions. You can't, on the one hand, claim it's all fantastic in Milton Keynes and then jump on a train and vote against our best interests when you get to Westminster. This election's about accountability, and that's why you need to be held to account for the actions you've taken over the last 5 years and whether they're in the best interest of your whips or in the best interest of Milton Keynes.
Just before Iain comes back in on that, just want to give Steve from the Independents or Vince from UKIP just an opportunity to come in on these points that are being raised.
Oh, no, I'm enjoying the to-ing and fro-ing. Let them carry on.
All right, so Iain, back to you.
Well, I'm very happy to stand on my record. Our economy is back on track. That will generate the extra resources that we all want to see spent on our public services. But yes, we've had to make some tough decisions. If you remember the note that was left by the outgoing Labour Treasury Minister, sorry, there is no money left. That wasn't a joke. That was a reality. And we've had to roll our sleeves up, get the country's finances sorted out. And I'm very happy to stand on the record. There's still a lot to do. No one is pretending everything is perfect. But they'll...
I was going to say...
we're getting the deficit down. Until we get the deficit eliminated, debt will go up. Yes, you're quite right. But we've got a plan to sort it out. And none of my other party candidates have that. So stick with the plan.
Sorry, Iain, if I could just challenge you on that. You're saying about the deficit there, and I'm wondering if you really understand what the deficit means when you're talking about that. Debt is actually very important, and the fact is that under George Osborne, your government has borrowed more in the last 5 years than the preceding Labour government did in 13 years. That is a fact. That is out there. When you talk about economic growth and you talk about GDP, you forget to account for the fact that GDP per capita has stagnated. When you say that the economy is back on track, it's simply not. And when you say to us, you know, we're a relatively rich society, a comparatively rich country, 1 million people using food banks, 1.8 million people on zero-hours contracts, 25% child poverty, actually up to 40% in some areas, 1.7 million people on the social housing waiting list. That is not an economy back on track. That is not a prosperous nation. Where is that money? I will tell you where it is. The top 20% of earners in this country have seen their personal wealth increase by 57% in the last 5 years. The Rich List, published just last weekend, showed us that that wealth has doubled since 2009. While we have people starving, the wealthy, who you are giving tax breaks to, are lining their pockets at our expense.
Samantha, thank you for that. Iain? That was Samantha from the Greens, by the way. Sorry.
I beg your pardon?
Sorry, Iain. I was just explaining who that was. It's Samantha from the Greens, sorry.
I fully understand the difference between deficit and debt. Yes, we still have a deficit, but we're getting it down. And the parties to my left have voted against pretty much every measure we've had to take to get it down, so I'm taking no lectures from them. And we're on track to get the deficit eliminated and then start repaying some of the debt we owe. It is a long job to do. It isn't going to happen overnight, but we're heading in the right direction. We've got one of the strongest rates of growth in the Western world. That is something we have to continue. If we don't, we're not going to generate the resources to invest in public services. That's the simple fact of the matter. So, yes, we've got a long way to go, but I'm proud of the progress we've made thus far.
Okay, we're almost at the end of our broadcast. Vince, very quickly.
I just wanted to say that that the Conservative, well, the coalition government have achieved a doubling of the national debt in 5 years. Previous to that, it took the Labour government 13 years to achieve the same. I'm tired of hearing how the economy's on the up. We've heard that GDP is up by 2.8%, but in our pockets it's 0.2%. So where has that funding gone? As Samantha says, the top end are enjoying those bonuses. And to say that no other party has an answer on funding, UKIP clearly has. Come out of the EU, cut down on foreign aid spending, and let's spend some of that money on our own people.
Finally, we'll go to Steve from the Independents.
I just wanted to bring it back to Milton Keynes. My upset isn't with Iain, other than the fact that as a Conservative, he's been whipped by his main party. He's had this tenure, and that this has been his job. And the reason I'm sitting here is because the job hasn't been done well enough for Milton Keynes. We don't have the city deal that was alluded to come and save us in 2013. Cambridge, Oxford, Thames Valley, they have it. We don't. Our apprenticeship numbers are falling. The small businesses need motivation and incentivising so we can get our jobs back up. So I'm less upset about the big Conservative arguments that's going on with Labour and the Greens. I'm more upset about the local issues and how to make a difference. When I'm voting, I'm not going to vote for someone that's going to be whipped. I want someone that's going to do my bidding and not the party's bidding.
Thank you, Steve, from the Independents. So we're running short of time now. Literally need to wrap this up. Is there another member of the audience that has got a question that hasn't asked one already? Okay, all right. What we'll do then is that we'll wrap up with asking the candidates then what is the single most important thing to them if they're re-elected for Milton Keynes. So we'll start with Andrew Pakes.
If I'm re-elected, you're being presumptive. You say.
Sorry, if you're elected.
But thank you very much, Darren.
If you're
That's
elected,
very kind
Andrew,
of you.
sorry.
To me, the biggest issue for Milton Keynes is we get investment, expansion and infrastructure back together. If we continue to expand at the rate we are, and we don't have the money we need for the GP surgeries, to expand the hospital, to get affordable housing built again, and to start putting money back in people's pockets so they can afford to live and get about this city, we are going to be expanding on the cheap. And that way lies disaster in any way you look at it. You just have to knock on doors in this city, as many of us have done in the last few weeks, to hear the stories and know they're true. Knocking on doors in Bletchley and meeting a 29-year-old man who was living with his parents, with his girlfriend, whose simple question was, if I'm working in a high street store, which he is, and they were putting me on a 0 hours contract on a minimum wage and wouldn't guarantee him more than 10 hours a week. His question is, how do him and his girlfriend get a start in life? And nothing I've heard for the last 5 years and nothing I've heard tonight from the Conservatives have assured me they get what's happening to ordinary people in this city. Because wages are still being constrained, because costs are still going up. And the only way we will make this city a success is that success is shared across all our residents. One Milton Keynes with one future. That means infrastructure and expansion together, and that means a government that will support Milton Keynes, not damage it.
Samantha from the Green Party, what is the most important thing if you're elected as MP for Milton Keynes South?
I think to me it would be resolving inequality. Wealth inequality particularly, because that encompasses so many of the areas that we've talked about tonight. It comes across housing, it comes across wages, it talks about access to education and healthcare. When you have a society where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and we're promised more austerity cuts from the Conservatives, and I'm sorry, Andrew, but also from Labour, I have to say, this is something that we have to tackle now, and we do it by clamping down on tax dodging, which is something that hasn't actually come up tonight. We do it by raising revenue in this country by asking the people with the wealth to pay their share and to share some of that burden so that we can invest in people. For Milton Keynes, that means we make sure that we have houses that people can afford to live in. I won't use the phrase affordable housing because it's become meaningless in political jargon these days. It means protecting our hospital and expanding it so that it fits people's needs. It means protecting our schools from backdoor privatisation and keeping them accountable to local services. It means making sure that when people go to work, they are paid a wage that they can live on and they don't need to turn to the state for handouts, because it is a scandal that the government is subsidising companies paying wages that people cannot live on. So those would be my priorities, and it all comes under the banner of resolving inequality.
Thank you, Samantha. From the Greens, let's go over to Vince from UKIP.
Well, as you all know, we need to leave the EU. We need to save money on foreign aid until we can afford it sometime in the future. We need to put money back into the pockets of the people of Milton Keynes. We need to provide social housing and affordable housing, and quickly. We need to do a catch-up. At the moment, levels of immigration, we need one house built every 7 minutes. That's not sustainable. The two established parties are content with remaining within the EU. This means that they're content with the levels of mass immigration that we've suffered already. The country needs to do a catch-up, basically. We need to protect the NHS from privatisation and invest more in the NHS in the right way and take it away from politics altogether and give it its own management regime. You have the three established parties all giving you false promises, and they're conning the public, basically, and we need to take politics away from that. We need to re-engage the people with politics by providing the truth. There will be no EU renegotiation that's being offered. There will be no EU referendum in the future. UKIP are a party that's just trying to get ordinary people into that system, and we're changing the political agenda.
Thank you, Vince. That's Vince from UKIP. Let's move over to Steve then from the Independents.
Yes, I think when all the election rhetoric and promises are over, you have to think about what are you going to be left with. And what I want to be left with is someone that actually puts my constituency beyond a party, that is going to make a commitment to the policies that Milton Keynes want, not the policies that the party want, and make a commitment to make it easy for his constituents to fire him if he's not doing a good job, whatever way you want to describe it, recall or whatever. And that's true accountability. And I'm asking people, get away from this tactical voting. You will never change this system that we have that relies on MPs being whipped if all you do is tactically vote. Change it now, and you'll find in 5 years' time that the political landscape will be the one that you're going to enjoy. On policy, look, Milton Keynes needs investment, it needs businesses. We have to listen to the companies that we want to stay here, and we have to listen to their reasons. And if their reasons, part of their reasons are strong ones about being in the EU, then let's look at that and take it seriously. Absolutely, we need to control the way that we function in the EU, but let's take a little bit of a lead out of Angela Merkel's book, who's resolute and works hard for her country and goes and gets European laws working for her so that she doesn't have a welfare state that's being abused.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Iain Stewart from the Conservative Party.
Well, we've had a good debate tonight on the national issues. What I'd like to conclude on saying in these remarks is a very local one, and that is the future vision for Milton Keynes. In January 2017, we celebrate our 50th birthday. We've got expansion plans in place for the next few years, which will meet the immediate housing need. But we need to look much further and strategically into the future. What do we want to become? Do we continue to expand our physical space and our population? Do we become part of a regional hub with other developments like the new Garden City at Bicester, which will be linked by the new East-West rail line, or some other model? I think we need to have a civic conversation to make sure that we do balance the growth in housing with economic growth and the facilities and infrastructure that we need. If I'm re-elected, I'll play my part in trying to shape that conversation. And at the end of the process, what I want to see, we had a question earlier about the Central Milton Keynes neighbourhood plan. Whatever model is decided on, I think it should have public consent. We should have a Milton Keynes-wide referendum to approve whatever is proposed or to go back to the drawing board. I think we owe it to ourselves. We've had a fantastic success over the last 50 years. We can have a great future, but we need to think through strategically all that involves, and I'll play my part if I'm re-elected.
Thank you, Iain. That's Iain Stewart from the Conservative Party. Well, that literally wraps up our broadcast for tonight. If you'd like to listen back to this, maybe you missed the beginning of it, it's available on our website, MKFM.com. You'll be able to listen to it in full in a few hours on our website. Also, if you wanted to listen to last week's debate for Milton Keynes North, that's also available on our website as well. And this week on the mid-morning show, every day at 11 o'clock, we're speaking to the leaders of the council to find out what they're intending to do if they're elected as councillors across Milton Keynes. On tomorrow's show, we've got Edith Bald. We've had Peter Marland in already this week, and also Catherine from the Green Party. Again, you can listen to all those interviews again on our website. So I'd like to thank everyone tonight for joining us. Andrew from Labour, Samantha from the Greens, Vince from UKIP, Steve from the Independents, and Iain, of course, from the Conservatives. That's it. Let's have a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
On DAB, digital radio, and online at mkfm.com. This is MKFM.
From the Sky News Centre at 9, Nepal's Prime Minister has described his country as being on a